He got reincarnated by mistake, literally cremated early and sent to another world as compensation, with just a smartphone and healing. And his new start? Leader of a defeated barbarian tribe already crushed by a massive empire. So instead of trying to survive, he does the opposite. He rebuilds, regroups, and starts pushing back, from a lost battle to a war for independence. This story begins with Muno, son of the emperor of the Wafankro Empire, Gordius III, to whom the protagonist, Gaia, and his uncle, Athos Luncle, had come to pay homage. He dismissively replied, "Just some tribe from the outskirts dared to rebel against the empire. Did they really believe they could defeat them? Fortunately for them, their emperor is merciful. If their tribe fully submits to the empire, their lives will be spared. Let them rejoice in mercy and serve the empire loyally. Let them know their place. They are pathetic barbarians." The protagonist, lying on the floor from a kick, looked at his uncle. He remembered how he came to this world. It was a god and his assistant, an angel, who told him, an incorporeal being at the time, that they had made a mistake, and sincerely apologized for it. He stared at them in bewilderment. God had noticed. He was confused, right? Well, that's not surprising. In human terms, this place is something like the afterlife. He pointed to his assistant and said that this girl was at the scene of the accident he was in, but she rushed and brought him here alive. MC was even more confused by this. God continued contritely. At his age, and still a virgin, he was very sorry. Gaia objected, "But he's not like that, is he? Okay, everyone makes mistakes. Let them just bring him back, and everything will be fine." God hesitated and said, "Here's the thing. His body has already been cremated." The protagonist exclaimed in confusion, "What's going on? Does that mean he can't come back? Then what should he do?" Angel indignantly told him to calm down. "He's an adult, and he's acting like a child." The protagonist retorted irritably, judging by what he heard. It was entirely her fault, wasn't it? And she still dared to say anything to him? God raised his hand in a conciliatory tone and said, "Let him hear it out. When something like this happens, there is a way to fix it. He can't return him to his world, but he can transfer his soul to another world. He won't be reborn, but will end up in the body of someone who died young." The protagonist was skeptical. God continued, saying that, since it was their mistake, he would grant him abilities that would help him survive. As an apology, so to speak. MC thought, confused apologies. So he's destined for rebirth? However, his life hadn't been particularly good. Even the fact that they gave him a funeral was surprising. If there's a chance to start a new life, maybe things aren't so bad after all? After thinking a little more, he said, "Okay." He agrees. God happily replied, "Okay." He clarified what abilities he was talking about. The man wondered what abilities he was giving him. The angel exclaimed joyfully, "In that case, she could help." Honestly, she'd always dreamed of doing this at least once. Gaia thought irritably. She seemed to be enjoying this. She continued enthusiastically. "First of all, they'll strengthen his body. That's essential. And knowledge of languages, of course, is a must. Or maybe they could give him a device from his world, like a smartphone." God asked in surprise. "A smartphone? Let her wait. She can't decide everything herself." At that moment, a melodic ringing sounded, and the deities perked up. The protagonist asked, "What is it?" God replied, "It's the end of service bell. Excuse him, but it's time for him to leave. They're very strict about work-life balance these days." The protagonist exclaimed anxiously, "A scheduled departure? They were lucky, but that's not the point now. What about his rebirth?" God said he'd pick an ability at random, but it had to be something good. His assistant winked and said, "That's nothing. Snap your fingers and it's done." MC objected, "What are they even saying? You can't just do it randomly. It's terrible." The god and angel dissolved, saying, "Well then, have a safe journey." Gaia was indignant. The careless god and the equally careless angel. Because of their careless mistake and their equally careless decision, he had begun his second life. When he woke up, he jumped out of bed in fear. His body and head were covered in wounds. He was completely bandaged. The man sitting next to him exclaimed in surprise, "Gaia!" The protagonist thought in confusion, is this his new name? The man, who was his uncle, Athos Luncle, couldn't believe his eyes. Suddenly, the protagonist clutched his head, terrified, wondering what kind of information about this world was pouring directly into his head. Too much. His head was about to explode. This god could have at least said something about this beforehand. Athos cried out in alarm, "What's wrong with him?" MC looked at him and thought, is this his Uncle Athos? He addressed the man by name, who looked at him in amazement and, with tears in his eyes, hugged him very tightly. Athos exclaimed, "Thank God." How glad he was that his nephew was alive. Having lost his older brother and his wife, he was afraid of losing him too. Gaia thought in surprise, by the way, the god said that he would receive the body of someone who died young. So this guy, this man's nephew, really did die. This love and care was meant for the real Gaia. Was it right for him to take advantage of it? Athos, wiping away his tears, asked how his wounds were. After all, he had received serious wounds when he spoke out against the Imperials. He looked at his body in confusion and cringed, looking at Athos in surprise. He thought in bewilderment, his wounds healing right before his eyes. He'd been told they'd make his body strong. Was that really it? Yeah, and how was he supposed to explain that to him in the future? He pulled off the bandages and said, "Athos, everything's fine. Everything's not as bad as it seems." The man was happy. He said, "I see. Then, okay." At once, the man became serious and said, he's sorry, but even though he'd only just woken up, they needed to go with him immediately. Could he get up yet? The protagonist replied in surprise, yes, he can already. He got out of bed, got dressed, and left the house. He thought, judging by the information that had just poured into his head, Gaia was the son of the chieftain of a tribe called Brumand, and this tribe had rebelled against the tyranny of the Wafankro Empire. The imperial envoy asked Athos, "How is Gaia? How are his wounds?" The man replied, "He's fine. He can tell the emperor that they'll be arriving soon. Let him say that Athos and Gaia of the Bruman tribe will soon appear before the emperor to apologize for what happened." Hearing this, the protagonist asked in surprise, "What? Apologize to the empire? Is he seriously serious?" The uncle replied sadly, "They have no other choice. Their tribe rebelled against the imperial tyranny, and they lost. And now, when they came to the emperor and bowed low, Gordius III gloomily asked if they had anything to say in their defense. Athos said, "Yes, your majesty. This rebellion was entirely the work of the former chieftain Noel, who acted on his own. Their clan was forced into a battle they didn't want." MC wondered if Noel was his father's name in this world. The uncle continued his appeal to the emperor, asking him to show his mercy to their clan. Muno, the emperor's son, ordered Gaius to raise his head. When he complied, Muno kicked him in the face with all his might, sending him flying to the floor. The boy sneered contemptuously and remarked, "He's talking about mercy. He thinks he can ask for it. He's worth less than cattle, yet he asks like a master. How arrogant for a barbarian." Athos called out to his nephew with alarm and, rushing to Muno, began begging him to stop and beg for forgiveness. The emperor's son disgustedly pushed him away and told him not to touch him with his filthy hands. The protagonist thought with growing anger, "Barbarian." The emperor ordered his son to stop. Muno wanted to object to his father, but he wilted under his heavy gaze. Gordius III spoke, addressing Gaius as the acting chieftain of the tribe, and Athos. This rebellion had disturbed the peace of the empire and harmed his people. This could not be forgiven, but he did not seek unnecessary bloodshed. He had heard that Clan Brumund was a tribe of great warriors. From now on, let them swear to dedicate every drop of their blood to the empire. This will be their atonement. Athos bowed to the emperor and thanked his majesty for his mercy. The chief imperial knight told them to serve well and know their place. Sometime later, Athos, carrying the unconscious Gaius on his back, returned to his tribe. The words of the emperor's son, "These barbarians," rang in his mind. At that moment, the protagonist turned to him. The man asked if he was awake yet. He said he's sorry that he turned his parents into villains. "It's a shame, isn't it? They don't even have the strength to defend the honor of those who stood for the tribe." The protagonist thought his father and mother are barbarians. At that moment, a vision of their deaths entered his mind, and then a picture appeared of himself, still very young, walking with his father through the forest, holding a flower. He asked his father why the Imperials called them barbarians. "They were from the Bruman tribe, weren't they?" Noel sighed heavily and said, "It's because they don't understand their language. To them, everything they say sounds like an incomprehensible jumble of words. Their clan, elves, lizardmen. In the eyes of the empire, they are all simply barbarians." The MC asked in surprise, "They don't understand them? Are they that stupid?" His father looked at him in surprise at first, then burst out laughing, patted him on the head, and exclaimed, "Really? Yes. They're just idiots. They have their own way. It's just as good as the imperial way. And so, someday, they will free their people from the empire's rule and build a land for their own people." The image disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. There were tears in Gaius's eyes. Athos, noticing this, cried out in alarm, "Is he hurt?" The protagonist angrily replied, "No, he was simply furious. Why did they have to suffer like this? Why did his parents and their people have to die? Is it just because they're barbarians, as the Imperials say? This is all wrong." His uncle and the tribal men walking with them looked at him in amazement. Athos spoke his name in confusion. The protagonist thought he had never experienced such strong feelings. Nothing before. Are these Gaia's feelings? He looked at his trembling hands and realized, no, these are his own feelings. He said angrily out loud, he will never forgive the empire. He doesn't want to do this. Tears welled up in his eyes and he furiously wiped them away. Athos sadly noted, yes, being powerless is humiliating. They must become stronger. They simply must do this. Sometime later, at a tribal meeting, the villagers asked Athos if he was serious. He wanted his nephew to become the next chieftain. The man answered decisively, yes. One of the men said, he didn't want to seem rude, but wasn't he too young? Wouldn't it be better if he, Athos, led the tribe? The man answered, no. Even he believed that Gaius should lead them. He may have his faults, but he will support him. Please, let them all help him assume this position. The villagers thought for a moment and decided, so be it. One of the men, an authoritative voice, said, very well. If Athos spoke with such confidence, he trusted his judgment. After a while, the protagonist asked his uncle if he was sure this was the right choice. Athos looked at him silently, stopping stirring the stew. The protagonist exclaimed in bewilderment, what's the matter? He's not sure, the man replied. That's not the point. He looked closely at his nephew. MC said sheepishly, he means he's never been a leader, so he can't say he's sure. Athos laughed and said, enough. His brother and his father was a brave man. He spoke passionately of Bruman's future. He wanted to support him. He knew that he, Gaia, was still young and not like him. And yet, let him forgive him for placing his hopes on him. Let him make sure he could believe in him. The protagonist left the house and thought that this reckless god had truly put him in a terrible situation. He thought he was in a nightmare. He would do whatever it took. There were people who believed in him, and he would fulfill their wishes. If he started from the bottom, he had nothing to lose. Clenching his fists, the protagonist decided he would destroy the Empire. Let them call him a barbarian if they wanted. He would wear it like a badge of honor. Retreating to a secluded place, he remembered the angel's words about the smartphone and decided to try it out. He pointed his index finger into space and activated it. To his amazement, it worked. He wondered how it worked. It was one of the unique abilities the god had granted him. Apparently, the god knew little about their smartphones. As he explained, it was like a digital directory, adding that he would quickly figure it out. MC touched the screen and an image appeared. He muttered in surprise, "There's a detailed map here, and even information about plants, animals, and resources. This is simply incredible. Even though the ability's name is stupid, it will give them a huge advantage." He thinks even the Empire doesn't have a map like this, and there's information about people here. There's even information about his uncle, Athos. At that moment, the man called out to him, surprised, and asked what he was doing. The protagonist flinched in surprise and, shielding the device with his body, replied, "Nothing, he's just taking a walk." Athos said that if he was free, let him help them. Imperial soldiers had damaged the fence. It needed to be repaired quickly. The protagonist thought in surprise, so only he could see this system window? In other words, he was just staring into space, waving his hands in front of him like a madman? Next time, he'd have to be more careful. Approaching the construction site, Athos asked the residents how the work was progressing. They replied, "Good, they'll be finished soon." The problem was that the warehouse had also been damaged. They had little food left after the Imperial attack. MC asked, "Why not just buy it then? Nothing grows in this area?" His uncle replied, surprised, "They have no money." The protagonist thought, there's very little arable land in the forest where the tribe lives. Of course, they can get food by hunting animals, but they have to buy grain and other essential supplies from their neighbors. However, when it comes to buying, he immediately remembers that they have very little gold. The tribes used to survive by bartering, but now the Empire has occupied most of the fertile land. He needs to find resources he can sell. They were plotting a rebellion against the Empire, even though they themselves depended on its economy. He set out to explore the area, activating his smartphone. Looking at the map, the protagonist was surprised to notice that this was a deposit. They had rock salt here? Upon arriving, he was amazed to see that it really was a rock salt deposit. He was immediately overcome with nostalgia. He longed for the sea. Then he wondered, could this be sold? MC looked at the islands of rock salt and thought, salt is a very important resource for their lives. Salt deposits are very rare. They can also produce it from seawater, but that takes too much time. In their village, salt is a real luxury. Of course, everything depends on the deposit. If it's large enough, they can start selling it to the Empire. This place is so close to the village, he needs to check. The system informed him that he was on site. The protagonist noted in surprise, but if it's so close to the village, why hasn't it been found yet? At that moment, a blood bear appeared from behind the trees and roared upon seeing a man. Fleeing from the beast, the protagonist realized why. This is the habitat of blood bears. According to the smartphone, they are not particularly dangerous animals. Then, why not deal with it? MC leaped onto a tree, pushed off from it, and in mid-air struck the bear in the head with his sword. But to his great surprise, the weapon bounced off his opponent like a ball, without even damaging him. He had to run again, very quickly. When he reached the village, he told his uncle about it. Athos asked in surprise, he ran into a blood bear? How lucky he was that he wasn't hurt. The protagonist admitted that it was true. He thought it was all thanks to his resilient body. His wounds healed in literally minutes. One girl said the bear's hide was so tough that a regular knife couldn't pierce it. The man sitting next to her added that if they got rid of them, it would affect the neighboring forests. The protagonist thought sadly, so they have tough hides, right? Looks like he'll have to forget about rock salt for now. Athos asked what he was doing there anyway. He replied that he'd heard the tribe was having money problems. He was looking for places where they could start farming. They hadn't yet explored the blood bear's habitat, and he thought he'd definitely find something there. He's not very good at much. However, as the chief, he wants to help the tribe somehow. One of the villagers asked in surprise, did he happen to hit his head? He'd never spoken like that before. A second villager remarked, they're teasing him again. He told him it's fine, no need to worry. Lily laughingly remarked that when it comes to money, there's no one better than Athos. He's a true master negotiator. Athos said pompously, no, they just don't know how to behave. So let them trust him. They'll earn money the usual way. MC asked in bewilderment. The usual way? The villagers looked at him in surprise and smiled. Then they replied, they're mercenaries. Lily shouted at the warriors to get ready. Their next target is the kingdom of Argius. This time, the Empire has hired them, and they don't like it. They need to finish the job quickly and get their gold. She began to make the rounds of all the warriors. She asked one of them, did he fix the armor? He replied, there's too much of it. He can't finish it in time. If he's lucky, he'll fix her armor too. One of the warriors exclaimed, he'd made the spear shaft even longer. Now no one could reach it. Someone called him a fool. Then the warriors exclaimed, where are the weapons? Should they go barehanded? A brief squabble broke out between them. The protagonist, surprised, noticed that everyone was busy with something. Athos chuckled and said, Wars are their main source of income. At that moment, a mercenary called out to him and said with a joyful smile, "His order has finally arrived." It was a new weapon. The warriors, seeing it, were delighted to see their new swords. They disassembled the weapons and waved them around in glee. The protagonist, surprised, asked his uncle why he'd ordered new weapons. "They must have been very expensive." Athos replied, "Nothing of the sort. They were kindly provided by their new employer." MC exclaimed in confusion. "What? The Empire decided to support them?" His uncle replied, "And more. They were promised large food supplies during the war." He asked, confused, "Is that true?" To be honest, when he learned the Empire had hired them, he thought they'd simply use them, and they even offered them decent pay. Athos looked at him carefully and said, "The current Emperor, Gordius III, has a weakness for war. The Empire is constantly in conflict with neighboring countries. With each new victory, they capture new territories, expanding their borders. But, in his opinion, they lack worthy soldiers. Even though they lost as a tribe, they needed them as mercenaries. This gave them a considerable advantage during the negotiations." The protagonist looked at him and said admiringly, "He's amazing." The man became embarrassed, laughed, and replied, "What's wrong with him? Stop embarrassing him." The mercenary turned to the protagonist and said, "There's something for him too. Let him take a look." "His old sword is no good," he replied in surprise. "Good." When he picked up the weapon, the warriors began to encourage him. "Now he can hunt blood bears." The mercenary asked, "How does he like it?" MC, examining the weapon, thought he'd been curious about this for a long time. If you look closely, as he thought, their swords aren't made of iron. What is it? Copper, although most likely bronze. It's an alloy of copper and tin, fairly easy to work with, easy to polish, and very resistant to corrosion. 10 yen coins are made from bronze. Although this alloy is easy to work with and lasts a long time, bronze is much inferior to iron. Iron is many times stronger than bronze. This requires skilled craftsmanship to process. If you look at the armor of the Imperial soldiers, most of it is made of iron. It all comes back to their main problem. They can only dream of such a thing. Namely, it's too expensive. His imagination conjured up a pile of coins. Perhaps the problem that prevented him from killing the blood bear was the poor quality of the weapon. Once they earned money, the first thing they needed to do was acquire iron weapons. Athos turned to him and said he had a proposal for him. He asked, perplexed, what it would be. The man sheepishly ruffled his hair and said he thought it would be a major battle, and their forces alone might not be enough. Therefore, this time, he proposed enlisting the support of other tribes. Sometime later, other warriors approached their village. They were ordinary people, elves, lizardmen. The protagonist exclaimed in surprise. "Wow," Uncle said. These were the tribes of Anguro, Bandar, and even the lizardmen came. It had been a long time since they had gathered together. The protagonist remarked that it was nice to hear that they were all so friendly. Athos objected, but they were all here for the money. Since the Empire had hired their tribe, they would lead the people on a mission. Let him go around all the tribes and greet them. He replied, of course, he would try. He looked at the warriors, and Jessica caught his attention. He couldn't help but admire her, thinking, she was so beautiful. The girl, noticing his gaze, said something in her own language. The MC was confused and thought he didn't understand her at all. So elves have a different language? Suddenly his head felt like it was squeezed in a vice. He squeezed it and, crouching down, exclaimed, "It hurts." He realized knowledge of the elven language was flooding his head. God had told him he'd be good at languages. A system voice in his head announced, downloading knowledge, installing a new language. The protagonist thought, that old man's up to something again. He'd told him last time, everything would be fine. He wouldn't even notice. Jessica leaned over him and asked in surprise, is he okay? The protagonist replied, please forgive me. He's fine. She needn't worry. Jessica asked confused, this language, he knows it? At that moment, Rosso, the lizard man, approached him, asking if he knew a guy named Gaia. He was the chieftain of the Lizardman tribe, and his name was Rosso. He'd heard that this time they would be led by the chieftain of the Bruman tribe, and he'd like to meet him. Where was he? The protagonist replied, confused, it was him, and he thanked him for agreeing to help. Rosso shook his hand and clarified, so he was Chieftain Brumand? He was glad to meet him. The protagonist expressed mutual pleasure at meeting him. Leaning toward him, the lizardman asked if he was just too small for the tribe. Was he eating well? The MC replied, of course, he'll grow up soon. Rosso laughed and said, he's joking. Jessica sighed and said, idle chatter. The lizardman remarked, offensively, is this the elven tribe? They didn't know their barbaric language, so no one understood what they were thinking. Jessica looked at him gloomily and declared, she's the niece of the elven village chief. Jessica. He knew the common language, he just didn't like to speak it. And as for their thoughts, they had nothing to do with the lizard tribe. Rosso drawled in surprise. So she knows the language? So she understood them all this time? Then why was she silent? Shy. Jessica replied, of course not. Their elven language sounds much more refined. Let them simply use their language when speaking. The protagonist thought in confusion this was their first meeting. Then why were they so hostile towards each other? Indeed, the elves glanced irritably at the lizardmen, who glanced back at them. At that moment, Athos told him, it's time for them to go. He was surprised. Already? He hadn't finished talking to the other chieftains yet. His uncle replied, he'll get to know them on the road. The mercenary said the journey would be long, so let their chieftain make the effort. Everyone hurriedly began to gather their troops. The protagonist thought excitedly, they're heading to the battlefield. This would be his first battle. The warriors set out. Meanwhile, on the plains of the kingdom of Argeus, in the southeast of the kingdom, at the foot of a mountain range, this was not the first conflict between the empire and the kingdom for control of this land. In times of peace, golden fields of wheat are located here. But now only the spearheads of the soldiers were visible. The empire's chief knight commanded his army to halt and declared that their primary objective was to defeat the kingdom's main forces, located on the Pyros plain, and reclaim control of these lands. They were the legitimate representatives of this land, and they could not allow criminals to roam their lands with impunity. They would set up camp with their main forces here, and soon His Majesty the Emperor would demonstrate the empire's might to the kingdom. The knights began chanting, "Glory to His Majesty the Emperor." The protagonist thought, wow, the emperor is quite popular among the soldiers. The empire was constantly in conflict with neighboring countries. With each new victory, they captured new territories, expanding their borders. Although he hated the emperor, he had to admit, people admired him, but he needed to calm down. He had work to do. The general declared that after capturing these lands, they would go south to help Prince Muno. He's counting on them. His comrade remarked that if the prince were in command, it would be fine, right? The general replied, "Keep your voice down, or they'll hear you." He informed the soldiers that they were ordered to wait until further orders were given. The protagonist turned to him and asked where they should go. The general looked at him in surprise and remarked, "Are these barbarians? What are they doing here?" The knight replied, he heard they were hired as mercenaries. How could they speak the imperial language? Judging by their expressions, they didn't understand a thing. And why were they hired anyway? The general became confused and clarified, "Are they really barbarian mercenaries? Their fighting style is different from the imperial one, and the commanders will have a hard time managing their troops if they include them in the general formation. It will be better for them to cover their flanks. That's all. Everyone can go their separate ways," the MC said irritably. "What an arrogant idiot. He thinks they're just ballast, just getting in the way?" Athos replied, "Exactly. They could have at least pretended to be a little happy to see them." Lily said they'd have to be patient. One of the warriors remarked, "What kind of tactics are they using? With such huge shields, they're slower than a turtle." The protagonist thought, he needs to calm down. If they make a scene here, there'll be problems later. He said out loud, "Many tribes don't know the imperial language. First of all, they need to explain the situation to the other tribes. Besides, it's important to maintain good relations between tribes." Two warriors noticed. That's right. With their personalities, they could easily start a fight. The protagonist thought with a smile, it's just a joke, right? They told their leader not to worry about it. Fighting without fear and dying without regret, that's considered an honor in their tribe. The MC frowned and wondered if this is why his parents died. They're called mercenaries not only because of their outlook on life, but also because of their different attitudes toward death. He retreated to a secluded spot, activated his smartphone, and muttered, "He's different from them. If it were up to him, he'd prefer there to be as few casualties as possible." He thought that since he'd arrived on the battlefield, he thought there was no point in trying to convince everyone to avoid unnecessary casualties. At the very least, he hoped there would be as few deaths as possible among the barbarians. He chuckled and noted that it was better to focus on the money. That's exactly why he came here. But there was nothing useful in the area. At that moment, a magical explosion appeared in space. The knights shouted at the warriors, "How are they doing? Was that magic? Who dared use that in the camp?" One of the warriors replied, "It's not them. The barbarians are to blame for everything." They pointed at Jessica and said, "That little girl is to blame for everything. She suddenly attacked him. This is very strange." The knight was surprised. Barbarians? They don't even know the imperial language. No wonder they act like savages. Jessica, flustered, tried to say something to them, trying to pronounce the phrase correctly so he would stop pestering her. The warrior drawled in surprise, "What?" And she attacked him over such a trifle. He doesn't know what it's like in the forest, but in the empire, they're all their slaves. The second warrior cheekily remarked, "What's wrong with them wanting to have a little fun? There was no need to make a fuss about this." Jessica exclaimed, "They're nothing." MC ran up to her and asked what happened. "Let her calm down." The warriors grinned and exclaimed, "Another one has arrived. This is her lover, right? Such a small creature, and she's already dating men? Barbarians are real animals." The protagonist glared at them and said in an icy tone, "He's the head of the tribe." Jessica thought in surprise, "The imperial language?" The protagonist continued, apologizing for his comrades attacking them. However, he would not allow them to insult him. The empire hired them to help, but that didn't mean they could be treated like that. He grabbed the hilt of his weapon and exclaimed, "According to barbarian customs, any dispute can be settled in a duel. What would they say to that?" At that moment, the general angrily asked, "What have they done here?" Everyone dispersed quickly. "Let everyone return to their positions." He looked at the warriors and added, "They'll explain themselves to their commander later." The soldiers left with dissatisfied expressions. Jessica turned to the MC in surprise. He suddenly turned sharply, grabbed her hands, and asked, "Was that explosion her doing? So elves have magic?" The girl asked in bewilderment. "Magic. Many elves can use it. They even have a special magic squad." He remarked in surprise, "Wow, how many people can use it? How many times can it be activated? What's her attack range?" Jessica, surprised by the number of questions, asked him to stop, saying she couldn't answer them all at once, but if he talked to her uncle, maybe he could find out the answers. He squeezed her hand and asked her for help with this. The girl, with her surprised friend standing behind her, asked in bewilderment, what's wrong with him? Sometime later, he met with Elenief, the head of the elven village. The elf asked if he wanted to learn about elven magic. He was from the Bruman tribe, wasn't he? The protagonist replied that he was. The head asked why he needed this. It had nothing to do with this war. The protagonist declared decisively he would tell him honestly. He would like to form an alliance with the elves. Their strength alone would clearly be insufficient to resist the enemies. Therefore, he wanted to acquire reliable allies. Usually, each barbarian tribe fights as they please. Of course, he wouldn't force them. However, he hopes they can form an alliance with them. Elenief raised his hand and held it forward, gesturing for him to be quiet. Then he said, before considering his proposal, he heard from Jessica that they had a skirmish with Imperial soldiers. He knows the elven language and wasn't afraid to stand up for them. Elves always repay their debts, such are their principles. MC exclaimed, so he agrees? The elven leader replied that first, he wanted to hear his terms. Like them, their army had arrived on the battlefield to earn money. The protagonist replied that he was ready to assure him that victory would be theirs. Elenief said, sounds promising. The protagonist looked at him happily and waved to Jessica with a smile. She looked at him in bewilderment. Her friend laughed sheepishly, and the girl looked at her with irritation. After some time, the general gathered everyone and declared, the lands of Pyros will witness the full glory of their great empire. Let them all fight without fear. In the name of His Majesty the Emperor. The knights drew themselves up, listening intently. The general addressed the empire's loyal warriors again, adding, may the god of war bless them. Then he commanded the vanguard to advance. Enemy archers, raise their shields. Squad of mages, activate the barrier. First squad of archers, take position. Then he commanded, fire. The warriors fired a volley, and the enemy responded with an attack. Rosso roared and exclaimed, he hears the sounds of war. It's here. He turned to his army and commanded them to fight. They must break away with all their might. The leader of the neighboring tribe also commanded his soldiers, hurry, let them not let the lizard men outflank them. A warrior of the Bruman tribe said irritably, run away. Lily exclaimed, oh God. She asked Athos, what will they do? The other tribes are already far ahead. The man addressed his nephew questioningly by name. The protagonist replied, yes, everything is fine. They can move out. The knights saw their movement and cried out in confusion, asking where they were going. There was no one there. What, were they trying to run away? One of the knights said angrily. He knew the barbarians couldn't be trusted. Rosso looked at him grimly. The warrior asked the protagonist, are you sure they did the right thing? The battle is on the other side. Damn it, the elves are following them too. What are they doing here? The MC replied, nobody should worry. From here they can get as close to the enemy as possible. The warriors exclaimed in bewilderment. What? The protagonist said they would take the enemy commander's head first. They wondered, how did he know he was here? The protagonist replied, let them believe him. He would say so. He had received a divine revelation. He couldn't tell them he'd obtained the information using his smartphone skill. After all, meanwhile, the emperor himself, accompanied by his advisors and other minions, was playing a board game. One of his aides asked what was most important, what could turn the tide of the war. The second aide answered obviously, it was the empire's brave warriors. The third aide countered, no, it was fighting spirit. High army morale guarantees victory in battle. The others acknowledged, and indeed it was true. They turned to the emperor and asked, what does His Majesty think? Gordius III placed his empty glass under the jug, and a servant poured him a fresh glass of wine. He carefully examined the contents of the glass and remained silent. Meanwhile, the Gaia tribe continued to rush forward. The warriors asked in bewilderment, kill the commander-in-chief? Is he serious right now? He answered, absolutely. He thought their weapons were worthless and their men were few. The only advantage they had was a precise map of the area from their smartphone. The only way to confront the enemy is to catch them off guard. The commander-in-chief of the royal army is at the center of the entire formation. If they go around the battlefield on the right flank through the forest, they will come straight for their commander-in-chief. The main force of the command detachment is made up of cavalry. They have only foot soldiers. Charging head-on will end badly for them. Their main tactic will be a surprise attack, and before the enemy has time to recover, destroy their main forces. He shouted to the soldiers to be ready to burst into battle at any moment, or was he wrong? One of the soldiers exclaimed, what does this have to do with their flight? He turned to Athos and shouted for him to say something. The man, keeping pace with his nephew, recalled their conversation. Gaia said they would kill the enemy commander-in-chief. Without a leader, the royal army would quickly disintegrate, and utter chaos would ensue. Then, the imperial army would gain a huge advantage. If this way they could minimize the number of casualties, he thought it was worth a try. And now, watching Jessica draw a level with the protagonist, he told the warriors, no, he believed in him. He was sure his nephew knew what he was doing. The warrior cursed in response and said, well, come what may. The mercenary replied, the previous chieftain had been an unusual man too. Their young chieftain also had nothing but wildness in his head. A detachment of royal mages launched a magical attack on the enemy. The warriors, covering themselves with their shields, were agitated. The general shouted at the warriors to hold on. The barrier would protect them. Let them wait for an opportunity to attack. The enemy's forces weren't limitless either. His assistant said, "Damn magic." He still couldn't get used to this noise. The general remarked that it was good they had created the magical barrier. Without it, they would have been destroyed long ago. Many have a talent for magic, but only their unit is capable of creating such a strong barrier. The assistant remarked that just because they dislike magic doesn't mean the enemy won't use it. The general replied that their strength will eventually run out. The main thing is to take their time and choose the perfect moment for a counterattack. At that moment, a scout ran up to him. The general asked, "What's the situation?" The knight replied, "The enemy forces have split up. They're probably trying to change formations." The general's assistant suggested they've decided to redeploy the cavalry. The commander-in-chief replied, "It's just a ruse. They're staying put." The assistant remarked that it looked like this war would last a long time. The general said, "Nothing surprising. He didn't expect it to be over in a day." He turned to the scout and ordered a further report. The knight said that some of the mercenaries from the barbarian tribes had abandoned their positions and disappeared into the forest. The man was surprised. "Barbarians?" his assistant exclaimed. "They've escaped?" He'd heard they were fearless warriors. It turned out to be just a rumor. The general said thoughtfully, "The forest." He turned to the scout and asked where they were headed. The knight looked at him in bewilderment. The man added, "Which way are the barbarians headed?" He wanted him to answer immediately. The knight was confused. Apparently, he didn't know. At that moment, the Burmund tribe was making its way through the forest. Athos asked his nephew if he'd heard he'd managed to forge an alliance with the elves. He was very impressed with his diplomatic skills, but he never thought he'd be able to reach an agreement with the lizardmen. He could have said so sooner. With these words, he looked at the leader of the tribe. Rosso exclaimed, "He doesn't even know what's going on." The protagonist asked, "What is he doing here?" He answered, "How could he?" He saw their group flee into the forest. He became curious, so he came. The protagonist wondered in surprise, wondering what this strange reason was. At that moment, Jessica turned to him, gesturing forward. The royal army stood nearby. The allies crouched to avoid revealing themselves. Athos asked, "Are they there?" MC said yes. Activating his smartphone, he checked the data and added that the enemy commander was ahead. Lily remarked that fighting against cavalry was not easy. One of the warriors agreed, "Yes, they will give them problems." Gaia replied he agreed with this. That's why he wanted the elves to break through the enemy cavalry formation with magic. One of the warriors said skeptically, "Magic?" The elven leader told the protagonist it was true. If the enemies were protected by a barrier, they would only reveal their positions. "Wouldn't it be better to shoot them with archers?" He replied, "No, magic is needed, and they must definitely aim exactly where he indicated, at the gap in their defense." He gave the command to attack. The royal warriors, noticing the movement, cried out, "An enemy attack!" They were under attack. Their general replied, "Don't panic, they have nothing but infantry. Let them form a line and crush them." At that moment, the elves activated their magic, hitting the target, a gap in the defense. The royal warriors panicked. "Magic? What happened to the barter? Let everyone be careful." The commander cursed and noted that the blow had struck a weak spot. What a disaster. He shouted at the warriors to calm down and said it was just an accident. The magical attack intensified. The commander exclaimed in bewilderment, "What's going on?" At that moment, one of the warriors from the Brumund tribe exclaimed, "Oh, come on! Did he get through again?" The protagonist told the leader of the elves, "He's asking them to go further, to the right corner." Elanyef replied, he understood. Jessica thought in surprise, "It can't be." The magic had broken through the barrier several times. The protagonist thought, that's it. The plan had worked perfectly. The enemy was at a loss. Now was the perfect moment to attack. He informed his warriors the enemy had been routed. Their target was the commander-in-chief's head. He commanded the barbarian mercenary units to advance into battle. The tribe's warriors rushed forward, cutting down their enemies. Everyone fought desperately, with complete dedication. The commander of the royal army shouted to his warriors, "Let them strike the enemy. Everyone stay in their positions. They're just infantry." Rosso approached him and gloomily suggested he dismount. It was time to play. Athos shouted to his comrades, "We need to continue the attack." The commander was already close. MC looked at one of them, the commander, and thought, it's not him. He looked at the second commander and thought, this one isn't him either. Where did the one they needed go? He looked around and saw a horseman in rich armor shouting at the warriors to retreat and regroup. The protagonist thought with a smile, "I've found it. There he is, his prey." He approached the commander from behind and wanted to strike him, but the commander-in-chief turned and parried his attack. The protagonist shouted, "He is the leader of the Brumund mercenary group. His name is Gaia. His head will be his." At that moment, a warrior appeared before him, brandishing his sword and shouting, "He won't let him touch the commander-in-chief." Suddenly, as if out of nowhere, Rosso appeared next to the MC, blocking the warrior's path and telling the protagonist he will cover him. The commander-in-chief is his. The protagonist looked at his comrade gratefully and began to approach his target. The commander-in-chief, fighting back with his weapon, shouted at him, "You pathetic barbarian." MC thought he couldn't get close because of the spear. Jumping wouldn't do either. There was only one option, to charge straight ahead. He rushed forward, and the commander-in-chief's spear pierced him through. After that, the general laughed maliciously and said, "He's just an idiot. He never thought he, a barbarian, would give up so easily. All his efforts were in vain. He didn't have time to finish his last word. The protagonist grabbed the hand holding the spear, pulled him sharply toward himself, throwing him off his horse, and with a powerful punch, brought him to the ground, pinning him with his foot. The commander-in-chief said in surprise, "So that's what he's planning? He even wants to kill him at the cost of his life?" The protagonist replied, "No, he's mistaken." Pulling the spear from himself, he raised it over his enemy and declared, "The only one who will die today is him." With these words, he finished him off. At that moment, Rosso ran up to him and, seeing his wound, anxiously asked, "Is he okay? He's not going to die, right?" MC, clutching his wound, replied with a smile, "He's fine. He's not going to die here." The lizardman looked at the fallen commander-in-chief and asked, "Is this the enemy commander?" Gaia replied, "Yes, he is." Rosso put his arm around his shoulders and loudly addressed the soldiers of the royal army. He said, "Their commander has fallen at the hands of the head of the Bruman mercenaries." The enemy froze at the news. The tribe's warriors rejoiced. He actually succeeded. Jessica thought in surprise. She couldn't believe it. He actually did it. One of the enemy commanders expressed bewilderment. How could some pathetic foot soldier do this? He shouted to the troops, "Defeat is unacceptable. Otherwise, they won't be able to look His Highness the Crown Prince in the eye. Spare no one. Kill them all." Athos, assessing the situation, shouted to his comrades, "The enemy is trying to surround them. They must retreat. They could easily hide in the forest." At that moment, something incredible happened. Horsemen were approaching, riding at full speed to help. The cavalry simply burst into the enemy army and began to attack. Rosso and the protagonist, along with the others, stared in amazement at what was happening. Then the tribal warriors joyfully exclaimed, "Cavalry! It's the Imperial cavalry! Hooray, they're saved!" They began shouting to the horsemen, "Yes, let them crush them all." At that moment, an Imperial general rode up to the protagonist, looked at him attentively, and approvingly said, "Well done." Both Rosso and the MC himself looked at him in amazement. The general added, "He expects a handsome reward." With these words, he and his army left the battlefield. After some time, the soldiers looked with admiration at the swords they had received and joyfully declared loudly that they were their spoils. "What a fine blade. Winning wars is very profitable." Gaia asked, "Are these the swords of the kingdom's soldiers? And could they take them?" Athos turned to him, agreed with a smile, and said that these were the trophies of their group, so there was no problem. He thought that the battle on the plain had ended in a single day. Having lost their commander, the kingdom's army was in complete disarray, and unable to cope with the advance of the Imperial soldiers, they suffered a crushing defeat. There is an unspoken rule among warriors. The trophies of the slain are taken by the one who killed them. The general of the Imperial army turned out to be a fair man, at least when it comes to distributing trophies. They also received a share of the spoils from the kingdom's soldiers. It felt like they were some kind of looters, but he would still gratefully accept this gift. May this warrior's soul rest in peace. Athos approached him, picked up the sword lying nearby, and said that it was such a fine sword. Besides, it was an iron sword. He agreed with his uncle, who said loudly that, since they were poor, they were using the wealth of the royal army. He assumed that the kingdom's soldiers had iron equipment. It was practically impossible to find it in the markets. If they could take it all, they would make a fortune. Of course, it was a fine sword, and it could be used for a long time, but if necessary, it could be put up for sale. The others looked at him and said that he was beside himself with happiness. It was natural. After all, they were barely making ends meet. The protagonist looked at the sword in his hands, and thought that with such a weapon, they could even kill bloody bears. He would definitely try it when they returned, and besides, he wasn't going to give up rock salt. He noticed Rosso examining various swords and said that he was also lucky. He should look at this iron sword. He looked at the two swords with a calm expression and threw away the one he pointed to, which surprised him very much, and he asked loudly, "What is he doing?" "It's an iron sword." He turned to it and asked in a calm tone, "So what?" He pointed to the silver sword and said that this one shines beautifully. He used one like this before, but it rusts quickly. MC was shocked by this and offered another sword and said that he can take this weapon. It is definitely better. He still refused and said that it will definitely stand out on the battlefield. He asked loudly, "Isn't it cool to walk around with an iron weapon?" A man came to them, called him and said that it looks like they were also given a horse. Where should he leave it? They looked at it. Rosso's mouth started to water. He called the horse, and he became very worried about this and asked loudly, did he want to eat it? He was disappointed when he was forbidden to do this, and Lily called him and said that he should wash himself as soon as he had the opportunity. He was covered in blood. Later, he went to the river and asked in a confused tone, did the lizardman tribe seriously throw away iron weapons all this time? They choose weapons by beauty. You can't throw away swords just because they don't like them. That's a real waste. He looked at his clothes and said that it was terrible. He won't even have a scar because of his fast recovery. He will say that this is not his blood. He remembered the past and thought about this strange feeling. Throughout the entire battle, his body seemed to move instinctively. Maybe it was because of the memories of the real Gaia. However, he should be more careful. If he continues to attack enemies so recklessly, he might die one day. But right now, He just can't die. Of course, this is a gift from God, but now it feels like some kind of monster. The main thing is that he could take revenge on the Empire. He came to the lake, noticed that someone was there, apologized for disturbing him, and asked who was there. He came closer, saw that it was Jessica. She turned around and noticed him. She asked with a calm expression, "Did he also come to wash? The water is cold, so he shouldn't linger." She was confused because he knelt down and bowed his head and loudly asked what was wrong with him. He apologized and said that this is how he offers his sincere apologies for accidentally seeing her while she was swimming. He was about to leave, and she calmly said that she was not angry at all. He, kneeling, was trying to find something, and she came closer, started hitting him with a towel, and loudly said that she had already said that she was not angry. He just needed to be more confident. He turned away, closed his eyes, asked her to cover herself, and said that he no longer knew where to look. After that, she came out of the lake, and he began to undress to go wash himself. He noticed that she was looking at him intently and asked her not to do it. Her attention was drawn to the wound on his back, and she asked if it hurt a lot. He agreed, and she asked why he submitted to the Empire and even made such sacrifices. He said with a slightly dissatisfied expression that it was not his decision, but the whole tribe's. She said that the previous chieftain and his wife were killed by the Empire. They were his parents, right? They killed his family, but he was still ready to submit to the Empire. He remembered the past and said loudly that he understood this himself. She was a little surprised by this, and he apologized for it. She said that all the elves said that they had no choice. Many elves were taken into slavery, and her parents were killed. She clenched her fists, gritted her teeth, and said that it made her terribly angry. She apologized, turned away, and began wiping away tears. She said that the water was very cold, so he shouldn't linger. After a while, someone asked if they were all ready. Lily said that the Imperials were so rude. They immediately ordered to go to the next battlefield. The rest of the team said that he didn't care where, as long as they were well paid. They continued to gather, and Athos said that it looked like this battle was only the beginning of the invasion. Another one was going on nearby, and they were being sent there as reinforcements. Honestly, a really serious battle awaited them further. A fortress in the south of the kingdom of Argeus, Coron. After a while, the people besieging the fortress walls noticed that sunset was approaching, and their commander ordered a retreat. When the protagonist arrived at the camp, he saw a merchant who called out to a soldier passing by and asked if he would like a little drink. He could sell alcohol at a discount. This caught his attention. He called his uncle in a confused tone and asked, "Aren't these the barracks?" The atmosphere was completely different from the plains. He agreed and said that when such a large camp is set up, it's not uncommon for merchants to show up. He asked with a little surprise, "So the battle will end as quickly as in Pyros?" Athos said that this time, it seems everything will not go so easily. Besides, in any case, first they must meet with the commander-in-chief. They must report their arrival. They walked further. The guards noticed them and asked, "Did you come from the Pyros plain?" It was quite fast. It seems the battle there was much easier than here. MC said that they wanted to meet with the commander-in-chief. The guards allowed them to pass. There he saw a lot of people drinking alcohol and wondered why he had a strange feeling. The guard led them to the commander-in-chief's tent and said they were supposed to be there and behave properly. They went inside, and he was surprised to smell perfume. He accidentally bumped into one of the many girls, and she asked him to be careful. They looked at him and asked if he was a soldier too. One of them called out to His Highness and said he had visitors. Muno looked at them with a displeased expression and said that he had ordered not to let anyone in. He was very surprised when he saw him and immediately remembered, but said nothing. Athos stood nearby and said that they were barbarian mercenaries who had come to their aid from the plains of Pyros. They wanted to greet His Highness, the Crown Prince. He took a sip from his glass, then threw it back at him and said that the barbarians were, as always, a lot of trouble. Can't they see that he was busy? They shouldn't bother him with their idle talk. He doesn't need these freaks at all. It's all because of Habitius. He always does whatever he wants. The guards will need to be punished since they let all this trash in here. He loudly called the servant and said that he should escort these freaks away from here. Gaia got angry about this and was about to do something, but he grabbed him by the shoulder, asked him to stop, and said that they had already done everything they wanted. It was time for them to go. Leaving the tent behind the servant, he asked where they could settle down. He was confused by this question and said that he hadn't been told anything about it. They should find a free place for themselves, and that's all. Besides, they didn't need to rush so much. The siege of the fortress would soon be over. If they continue the assault, it will fall very soon. The kingdom's soldiers won't last long. Athos looked towards the sea, noticed a ship, and asked where they were sending it at such a time. The servant was surprised by this, looked there, and said that he hadn't heard anything about it. Maybe they were just mistaken? In general, he doesn't know anything about this. It's unlikely that it's something serious. The protagonist asked, he doesn't know what the situation is at the fortress, but why is everything so terrible in the camp? He thought, as his uncle said, he is the crown prince of the empire, so why is he acting like an idiot? Of course, if he's just pretending, although that can't be. He doesn't want to obey him. He hates him. It's just a job. He called him with a wary and thoughtful look and asked if he noticed that ship. He remembered it and said that he thought he saw one. He thought that he was also interested. It's good that he saw it on the smartphone map. Athos called him again and said that the Imperial army might lose this battle. He was surprised by what he heard and asked why he thought so. After some time, the surprised Imperial soldiers loudly announced an attack, that they were being attacked by soldiers of the Kingdom of Argias. Two armies began to fight near the camp, and a surprised Muno loudly asked a servant what was happening here. Why were they surrounded by the enemy? Athos called MC, and he turned to him and said that he knew they must act according to the plan. They cannot defeat him. A few days ago, Rosso walked past the trading stalls and said with admiration that there is so much food here. It is a wonderful sight, a real holiday. You don't even notice that there is a war. He walked nearby and said that there are about 20,000 soldiers in the Imperial camp. For merchants, this really is a real holiday. Jessica asked, there are so many shops here, so the war will still drag on, right? They better get to grips with this fortress quickly. He said with a satisfied look that if he could eat tasty food, everything would be fine with him. She was a little embarrassed by this answer and said that all he thought about was food. He became more serious and said that if you don't pay attention to food and drink, he doesn't like it here. The soldiers are very lethargic. Even today, during formation, they were simply told to wait for orders. It's still not clear why they were sent here. At least instead of a boring battlefield, they can stroll through the shops. Gaia, looking a little confused, said that he was here to buy supplies, not to have fun. He was a little upset by this and asked if he came on business. Then why did she go with him? She was a little confused and said that he shouldn't think anything strange. The leader of the Lizardman tribe, she just wanted to help him. Elves always repay debts. He understood everything and asked, so she also wanted to walk with him? She was indignant about this, thought for a moment, and said with a displeased look that everything was wrong. Rosso doubted it, but he didn't pay attention and said that he had already explained that he came here on business. They went on and Jessica asked, by the way, are all these merchants from the Empire? He looked around and said that it seemed so. Others could be accused of treason. He thought that there were a lot of different merchants here. It seemed it was worth looking around all the shops. He was surprised when he saw something, called them and said that they should look at it. They approached the counter, saw fruit. She was surprised by the beautiful color and asked, is this a fruit? The protagonist turned to her and asked, isn't it an orange? You need to peel it and you can eat it. He was surprised by this and said that nothing like this grows in their forest. A merchant noticed them and with a friendly smile said, welcome. Were they interested in oranges? This was just recently delivered by ship from the south, so it is fresh. He turned to a girl in similar clothes and asked if the customers could try an orange. She agreed and asked, one is enough, right? He looked at them intently and asked, are they merchants from the Kingdom of Argias? He asked with a calm expression. Did he notice that? He said with a smile that their imperial language is perfect. Only a slight accent betrays. He laughed and said that he was quite observant. His name is Karanos. As he said, he is from the Kingdom of Argias. They do not divide customers into people from the Empire or the Kingdom. For a merchant, the most important thing is profit. They don't have to worry. He has a license to conduct trade in the Empire. Rosso and Jessica tried the orange and were surprised to say that it was sweet. He asked with a smile if this was their first time trying an orange. In that case, they could also try watermelon. They were surprised again when they tried it, and he said that he was glad that they liked it. Oranges and watermelons have a long shelf life. They wanted to deliver them to the very last barbarians. These words caught MC's attention, and he asked why they called them that. He was a little surprised by this and asked if he said something wrong. He was with an elf and a lizardman, and they had never tried an orange or a watermelon. He had heard rumors that there was a detachment of barbarian mercenaries in the Imperial army, so he assumed that they were from that detachment. He said with a small smile that everything was as he said. Karanos asked if they came for supplies. They also had fresh food. He asked to take a look at it and said that he was looking for something small and with a long shelf life, enough for all members of the detachment. He said with a thoughtful look that he would certainly look at it. However, it sounded like they were preparing for a long hike. They only recently arrived at the camp, but they were already getting ready to leave. He said with a smile that he was such a cautious man. They just wanted to replenish their supplies. He apologized and then said that the amount was not small, but it was okay. As soon as everything was ready, he should contact him. They went further, and Rosso said that this merchant looked like a reliable person. He was talking about the one who was always smiling. He felt confidence in that smile. This is the look of a man who had undergone rigorous training. Gaia agreed and said that he was not a merchant at all. He was definitely a soldier, maybe a spy for the Kingdom of Argias. He also knew that they were from a barbarian tribe, which was creepy. Although this was to be expected, this was not a military camp, but who knows what. Jessica said with surprise that this was why the Imperial army could not capture the fortress. Every time the enemies were prepared for an attack, they understand that, right? Earlier, Athos said that this ship was heading for the fortress of Coron. He thought it was an Imperial ship, but the boy said he had never heard of anything like it. If it wasn't an Imperial ship, there was only one option. He asked his uncle with a worried look, "Does this mean it's a supply ship for the kingdom of RGS?" He agreed thoughtfully and said that the Imperial army had a huge advantage in numbers. They had completely surrounded the fortress. Under normal circumstances, victory would be a matter of time. However, if this ship was really delivering supplies to the fortress, the situation changed dramatically. A constant supply of supplies allowed them to withstand a long siege. Considering that supplies were coming regularly, it meant the kingdom knew that Koron Fortress was under siege. Sooner or later, enemy reinforcements would arrive. The soldiers, knowing that help was on the way, would defend the fortress by any means necessary. The Imperial army would not be able to capture the fortress. At the present time, the protagonist said that, as his uncle had said, the ship was sailing towards the fortress. Karanos assured them he could get all the necessary resources. If the fortress had been holding off the attacks so stubbornly all this time, it seemed reinforcements from the kingdom were already very close. Jessica agreed with him and asked if he meant they should prepare for retreat. He said there was no other way. He was sure the Imperial army had no idea what awaited them. Rosso asked if he had tried telling the commander-in-chief about this. If the Imperials hadn't noticed, shouldn't he have? She asked, disgust evident on her face, if he was being serious. He agreed and said she shouldn't forget that they were their employers. MC said they wouldn't listen to him anyway, so he wouldn't even try. He called him and said it wasn't a matter of whether they believed him or not. They were mercenaries and were paid for their work. It was a matter of debt. After this, they came to the commander-in-chief's tent, and the servant who heard their words asked, "Can they lose?" "It's simply impossible. Does he even imagine the difference in the strength of the armies? All they have to do is continue to hold the siege, and they will surrender themselves." He looked a little confused and said that he had explained that they were receiving supplies. He asked thoughtfully, does he think 1 or 2 ships would somehow change the course of the battle? He was about to tell them about the supplies, but another servant came running, called loudly for Ponko, and said that His Highness Muno was calling for them. He was surprised by this, and before leaving, said that, in any case, this was all nonsense. His Highness was the commander-in-chief in this battle. No matter what they got there, victory would still be the Empire's. Gaia loudly said that they should convey these words to him. He started to leave, looking displeased, saying that these barbarians were talking nonsense. They simply could not lose. Another servant ran up to them, called the Master, and said that His Highness did not understand why he had not arrived yet. He ran to his tent and loudly said that he must quickly get there before His Highness got angry. After some time, Karanos said there was wheat and briquettes, cheese and dried meat, dried grapes and figs, vegetable oil, salt and pepper. Also, packing materials and mountain donkeys. Should they check if everything they asked for was here? Athos agreed and thanked him, and he said that payment would be made in Imperial silver and horses. Rosso asked with a displeased look, are they seriously going to give him the horses? The protagonist turned to him and said that it couldn't be helped. Keeping horses was very expensive. They couldn't care for them properly. He laughed and said that they were good horses. He would take them at a reasonable price. Mountain donkeys would handle transportation perfectly well, and were easier to care for than horses. He agreed with a smile and asked if they would have that opportunity. Athos asked if they could count on continuing to use his services. He apologized and said that he would soon return to his home country. Besides, he sold out of all his goods, so the shop will be closed for a while. They plan to leave tomorrow. He thought that since the kingdom no longer needs information, all the spies are leaving this camp. The kingdom's reinforcements must arrive in a few days. He said that he was very sorry, they should be careful. He thanked him, and MC thought with a serious expression, the kingdom of Argias? A large country has been at odds with the Empire for a long time. Now they are economically dependent on the Empire, so they are in no hurry to launch a full-scale offensive. Karanos turned to him and said with a smile that it was nice talking with the barbarian tribes. He hoped that when the war is over, they could meet again. It would be a shame to lose such an interesting customer. He shook his hand, agreed, and said that he, too, was glad to meet them. Later, they came to their tent, where the rest of the squad had gathered, and he said that first of all, he wanted to thank all the leaders for listening to his words. He wanted them all to closely monitor the situation on the battlefield. Unfortunately, the Imperial army did not listen to his words. One of them said that there was no need to worry about them. They were to blame for their own stupidity. Gaia said that he had done his job, so whether to listen to his words or not was their own choice. They considered his words nonsense and refused to make any preparations, so he didn't care what happened to them next. Now, his main duty as the head of the barbarian mercenaries was to bring them all home safely. At the same time, the commander from the kingdom of Argeus was already near the fortress and watched from afar. A soldier approached him and told His Highness that the troops were ready. They were awaiting his order. He agreed and said that they had done a good job. After some time, the Imperial soldiers said that it was time to go to bed because he had drunk too much last night. He had to pull himself together. They were on duty after all. The waitress from yesterday was beautiful. He drank so much only because of her. Did he think that if he spent money, he would get lucky? A soldier looking into the distance called out to them and said that something was approaching here. They looked in that direction and asked who it was. There were so many of them. Maybe they were reinforcements? No, he hadn't been informed of anything about that. They started beating on the shield, loudly warning of an attack, and said that the kingdom's army was approaching from the north. The commander galloped up to them and said that they should all calm down. What was the situation? The soldier said that at this rate, they would be surrounded by enemy forces. He said loudly that they should stop panicking. Whoever it was, the kingdom was no match for them. They would meet them face to face. The soldier said loudly that ships from the kingdom of Argias were approaching from the sea. They were heading for the fortress, and when they landed, they would be surrounded. How did they even end up in this situation? They needed to report to the crown prince immediately. Athos, with a serious expression, said that panic had broken out in the camp. The protagonist agreed and said that it seemed that reinforcements from the kingdom of Argias had arrived. The squad members asked, have they really arrived? What would they do? Run away now? He looked at the map and thought that the enemy army was advancing from land and sea. Sooner or later, they would surround them. However, the Imperial army could not be defeated simply by superior numbers. What were they planning? Even though he hated the Empire, he did not want to see so many deaths. He began to leave and said that they should be ready to retreat at any moment, and he would head to the commander-in-chief. Rosso agreed and said that he must be careful. He kept looking at the system window and thought that they were advancing too fast. Who is their commander? Is it the crown prince of the kingdom of Argias, Alex? At the same time, a soldier galloped up to the prince and said that the siege of the fortress would soon be lifted. He understood him and said that he apologized for the delay to the brave warriors of Coron. They must go and trample these worthless Imperials. At the same time, in the camp, a soldier came to the prince and loudly said that their people were under attack from the north. They are suffering losses. Enemy reinforcements have also arrived at the Coron fortress. His Highness must give the order. Muno threw a glass of alcohol at him, loudly called them brainless idiots and asked, are they incapable of anything without instructions? They must deal with this on their own. MC came to his tent and wondered, even at a time like this, he drinks alcohol? Is he a complete idiot or something? Ponko told his Highness that he had heard. He loudly asked him to be quiet and said that those freaks from the kingdom would never defeat their army. They should simply attack and defeat them head on. They should return to their positions and not even think about bothering him anymore. The soldier, looking worried, wanted to say something, but he decided to intervene in their conversation and loudly told his Highness that, with all due respect, he should give the order to retreat. He was indignant at this and loudly asked, even though he was the leader of the mercenaries, why should they listen to him? He stood nearby and was very surprised to hear that he was the leader of the barbarians. Gaia loudly declared that he was advancing quickly. If they missed this chance, there would be no retreat. Muno turned and loudly asked, those weaklings from the kingdom will never surpass their soldiers, right? Ponko agreed with a confused tone and said that he had heard that their crown prince was just a front. Even if he was here, it wouldn't change anything. He said that the enemy army was already close, commanded by the crown prince, whose name was Alex. The soldiers were surprised by this and asked loudly, did he say crown prince? Was he the one they called the Silver Lion? They said he captured a small country in the east in just a few days. He had heard that the kingdom's recent successes were only thanks to the prince. If he really was here, then they were in trouble. He thought with some surprise that he was quite a famous person. He told his Highness that this man was a very dangerous opponent and that they really should retreat. Muno loudly ordered him to be silent and said that if they lost, their father would be disappointed in him. Ponko, looking confused, asked, then why not call it a temporary retreat? To be sure to capture the fortress, he would simply move the camp to another location. The soldiers agreed and said they were simply changing their deployment. They would lure them into a trap. This is not cowardice, but a tactical move. He was confident that His Majesty would understand this. Since he was the key figure in their army, he must be the first to retreat. His life was vital to the Empire. He considered this and said loudly that there was no other way out. He ordered everyone to retreat. They must convey the order to the battlefield. They were returning to the plain of Pyros. Later, Athos, looking displeased, said that this was simply terrible. The protagonist said that of course, he was even worse than he thought. Retreating an entire army was no easy matter. Their route across the sea had been cut off, so their only option was to flee by land. It was their responsibility anyway. They would retreat along the agreed-upon route. They were surprised when they heard Ponko ask them to wait, and they turned to him. He said that he didn't believe him then, and just, wait, it doesn't matter now. He wanted to discuss something with them. Maybe it would play into their hands. At the same time, Alex was fighting against the Empire's soldiers. Another soldier ran up to him and asked if he was okay. He turned to him and said that he was fine. Attention Argias soldiers. Their main goal is to save Coron Castle. They must help their brothers. The morale of his comrades rose and they all went on the attack. The general standing nearby called him and said that it was too dangerous here. He should retreat. The prince turned to him and said that he didn't need to worry. He wanted to raise the soldiers' morale and would not go too far. The offensive was going well. They would soon fortify the fortress. The information from Karanos turned out to be very useful. The Imperial army was completely unprepared for a surprise attack. The general called him and asked if he supported this war. He denied it and asked if he thought he liked this. The soldiers and civilians of Coron, the precious people of their kingdom, The fewer people they lose, the better for the kingdom. He's not as crazy as Emperor Gordius, it even infuriates him. Unfortunately, his son didn't inherit his talent and character. The general said that if they could capture the crown prince, it seemed it would give them a considerable advantage in negotiations with the empire. A soldier galloped up to them, loudly calling out to His Highness and saying that the imperial army had begun to move. They seemed to be heading towards the plains. Alex smiled and said that it seemed this guy wasn't so stupid after all. They should also move on. He wanted to see this Prince Muno in person. The general called out to him loudly and said it was too dangerous. He galloped on anyway, but he clutched his head and said it was useless. Once he'd made up his mind, he couldn't be persuaded otherwise. At the same time, MC was fighting against the kingdom's soldiers and loudly asked how this would work in their favor. Was he out of his mind? Maybe he decided to kill them all? They attacked with magic and continued running, and the servants who were running after him asked, they were just going to escape? So why did they bother here? He turned to them and said loudly in a serious tone that they should stop complaining. If they wanted to escape so much, they could go wherever they wanted. They started to complain about this, and Ponko loudly called out to him and asked, does he think they can retreat? He didn't know this, and the squad members asked loudly, they only wanted to escape with their squad, right? Then, why were they going with them? They even brought the crown prince with them. Gaia, with a displeased expression, loudly said that it was all for the gold. Earlier, he asked, does he want the mercenary squad to escape with the crown prince? He was absolutely sure the commander would probably be against it. Ponko said he no longer cared. He was a commander only in name, and as long as he didn't give any strange orders, the situation would be under control. If his report was true, then the kingdom's army already knew the crown prince was here, right? Then that meant all their forces would be focused on this place. They, barbarians, were nothing like imperial soldiers. They wouldn't attract as much attention, so they could escort the crown prince to safety. In any case, they had to bring the crown prince back alive. If they simply abandoned him, they could be prosecuted or even executed upon their return. If they helped rescue His Highness, he promised to secure a generous reward for them. For now, Athos asked if he thought he should have agreed to it then. The protagonist turned to him and asked why worry about it now. Did he think he would start judging him for his greed? He said with a small smile that he thought it would go much easier. He apologizes for giving in to his persuasion. A squad member running next to him called out to him and asked if everything was going according to plan. He agreed, looked at the map, and thought that the main forces of the Imperial Army were heading for the plains. The plan is to concentrate all forces in one direction and break out of the encirclement. However, the Royal Army must have already guessed this. They also sent forces to the road, and they responded quickly. It seems the rumors were true. Crown Prince Alex is an amazing person. The situation is developing well so far. A huge detachment would have been easily noticed. It would be much easier for a small group of barbarian mercenaries to slip through. The main thing now is to reach the forest. Barbarians have moved through forests and mountains all their lives, so this is commonplace for them. Within a few days, they carried supplies to the meeting place. When they reach the mountains, the royal army will no longer pursue them. He hopes that they can survive this battle. Is a detachment of the royal army heading towards them? It would be good to avoid the battle. Wait, there are too many of them. He noticed something and said loudly with a worried look that they need to run. The crown prince of the kingdom of Argias is heading towards them. At the same time, the general was riding a horse and asked if there was a detachment of imperial soldiers ahead. Would they go around them? He refused and said with a smile that there was no need. They would go straight ahead. The two detachments collided, and Muno cried out loudly in fear. Athos called him and said that at this rate they would lose the crown prince. MC said loudly that he would go to him. He should gather people and just run away. They could not win this fight. He became worried about this and said loudly that he should not do anything stupid. It was too dangerous. He said that he did not need to worry. He would distract them and return immediately. He thought with a serious expression that he was wrong. If not for him, they would not be in such serious danger. Muno, looking displeased, loudly asked, "What are they doing?" They were supposed to protect him. He grabbed Ponko by the hem of his robe and loudly demanded, "What's going on?" He said he'd be safe, didn't he? Alex galloped through the fighting soldiers and wondered who these people were. Were they also part of the Imperial Army? Right, Karanos was reporting on them. He was about to attack the prince, who fell from his horse and let out a loud cry of fear. However, Gaia deflected the blow with a swing of his sword. He was surprised by this, and wondered if these were people from the northern tribes of the Empire. He turned to the prince and loudly said that they should stop hesitating and running away, and he would hold off the enemy. He blocked another attack from the prince, and his sword cracked. He continued to deflect all his attacks, and thought that he needed to buy time for the prince to retreat. He was strong. Ordinary wounds heal thanks to his body. However, what if he was beheaded? Would he still live? At that moment, a powerful magical explosion occurred next to them, interrupting their battle. Jessica grabbed his hand and loudly said that they must act faster. She cannot believe that he attacked them alone. Is he completely stupid? There must be a limit to his recklessness. Rosso stood nearby, called her, and said that she would scold him later. He took Muno with one hand and said that he was taking charge of the prince. He will be able to escape, right? The soldiers of the kingdom galloped closer and called for their lord. The general loudly asked, "Is he all right?" After all, he warned him that this was dangerous. They must cover his highness and protect him. Jessica used a fire spell, but the soldiers managed to block this attack. He turned, called the protagonist, and said that there was little time left. They needed to leave. He started to run, looked at the prince, and thought, so this is what he is like, the crown prince of the kingdom of Argias. She called his name loudly and said that he should hurry. The general asked if he wanted to pursue them. Alex refused and said that they should leave them alone. They had a mage. If they started pursuing, they could suffer greatly. They should organize a formation and keep moving. The general asked if he still wanted to continue. He should teach him to worry about his own safety. He thought that the northern tribes of the empire, what did Karanos call them? Exactly. A group of barbarian mercenaries. After some time, MC looked at the map, saw several enemy units surrounding them, and with a displeased expression said that wherever they went, there was an ambush. What was wrong with them anyway? If it weren't for the map, he would definitely be dead already. Even though there were a lot of them, it was possible to slip through. First of all, they needed to leave this forest. They had already disappeared. So why were they continuing to search? What meticulous bastards. It's creepy. He was surprised when Muno loudly said that that was it. Enough, nothing would work. Why does he have to go through this? He can't feel his legs anymore. Why didn't they find a carriage? Ponko said that using a carriage in the forest would be very difficult. He became indignant about this and asked loudly, was he being so rude to him? He shouldn't forget that it's his responsibility to ensure his comfort. If they couldn't find a carriage, they should carry him on their backs. Athos looked at them and said they should rest for a while. Gaia agreed and thought the retreat from Coron Fortress had been very difficult. The arriving reinforcements from the kingdom of Argias completely destroyed the entire siege. In the end, the imperial army suffered a crushing defeat. They managed to rescue the crown prince from the encirclement. All that remained was to reach a safe place. Athos asked if he was sure it was worth it. He agreed and asked if while there was still the opportunity, why not earn some extra money? He agreed and said that they should be very handsomely compensated for rescuing the prince. Ponko approached them, apologized, and asked if they could talk. He turned to him and asked what was wrong. He asked, looking a little confused, if they could find some decent food. The gentleman said that all their food was simply disgusting, and he was tired of eating these briquettes and dried meat, and their hot soup couldn't even be called food. He wants sweets and wine, and also fruit juice. The protagonist was indignant about this and said loudly that they were actually running from an enemy army. They needed to get out of the forest and reach the mountains as quickly as possible. However, the smoke from the fire would immediately give away their location. Besides, all this food was meant for his group. They weren't so concerned about the luxury of the food. He said in a worried tone that, of course, he understood everything. However, despite all his arguments, it was impossible to reason with him. He thought about it and said, okay, he had some oranges in his bag. He could take them, just to calm him down. Ponko asked, by the way, what about the soup? He noticed his displeased expression and said that he understood everything and would try to calm him down. Athos asked, the prince turns out to be very picky, isn't he? He called his uncle and, with a serious expression, said that in the empire, they would demand double payment for the life of this pig. He was a little confused by this and agreed. Later, they continued their journey through the mountains. A member of the squad saw the road and said in a cheerful tone that they were already close. They saw a city with imperial flags and said that this was the imperial army. They would be safe in Pyros. Later in the city, the general said that first of all, he was glad to see that his highness was all right. He was told about the battle at Coron Fortress, a real tragedy. However, there was no need to worry, because he was safe now. Muno, with a dissatisfied expression, said that it was a real nightmare. He was told that they would easily win this war, but everything turned out to be completely wrong. The soldiers who were with him were completely at a loss as to what to do in an emergency. What incompetent and useless they were. They must answer. Why were there only weaklings in his army? He was about to answer his highness, but the guy standing next to him clicked his tongue in displeasure. The prince asked, and these barbarians, do they even realize who he is? He almost died. He was surprised by this and said that as he was informed, they helped him escape. Didn't he even listen to him? He said loudly with a displeased expression that they ate nothing but slop. Those damned savages couldn't even make proper hot soup. He was tired, so they could go. He tried to keep a calm expression and said that he would do as he ordered. After some time, the group walked along the port, and the protagonist said that it looked like the crown prince had left for the capital on the imperial ship. Rosso said that this was great news. They wouldn't have to listen to his complaints anymore. He was irritating him terribly. However, they would have to meet him again soon. He was upset about this, and he said with a small smile that they would think about it when they arrived in the imperial capital. A man approached them, apologized, and he turned around and asked if he needed something. He said that he noticed them looking at the ship. Do they want to sail on this? Having received a positive answer, he said with a smile that it was just in time. Do they want to earn some money? They came to the ship, started carrying bags, and he said that 3 days ago, part of the crew left it and now they don't have enough hands. So they couldn't even leave the port. They can't even imagine how grateful he was. Athos said with a smile that since they were ready to give them a ride, they didn't mind helping. He said with a cheerful look that this was an amazing attitude. Rosso said that carrying luggage isn't that hard work. Jessica agreed, and they said with happy faces that they had also promised to cook them a special dinner. She can't wait for it anymore. MC looked at them and said that, as usual, they only had food on their minds. The man pointed to a box and said that this was food for the rowers. They should take it down. She was a little surprised by this, and he said that thanks to these people the ship can sail faster. He had already been on such a ship once. Since it was a warship, the rowers were mostly volunteers, and they were also well paid. It looked like it was a merchant ship, so the rowers were most likely ordinary people. They went down, she smelled a stench, and they saw that all the rowers were tied up. He was surprised by this, and asked what it meant. Athos, with a serious expression on his face, said that they were slaves. Probably the captain specially bought them for work. The man working on the ship called him, and said that he should stop looking around and bring food here. He agreed with a confused look and apologized. One of the slaves called him and asked, "Is he also from a barbarian tribe?" Gaia agreed and asked how he knew that. He said with a small smile that he had an accent of the Bruman tribe. He also recognized his uncle, called him by name and asked, "Is it him?" He was surprised by this and asked, "Does he know him?" Athos denied it. The slave was surprised by this and asked, "Has he really forgotten? They fought against the Empire together. He is also a barbarian. He remembers him well. Even on the battlefield, he was distinguished by his sharp mind." "How is Noel? Is he still alive?" He was lucky to meet his kinsman. The guard loudly ordered him to be silent and hit him on the head with a baton. He continued to hit him and loudly asked who allowed him to open his mouth. He must be quiet. He asked for forgiveness, and the guard loudly said that he was just a slave, and without permission, he was not even allowed to breathe. The protagonist grabbed his arm and loudly said that he should stop. He could die. He pushed him away with a wave of his hand and loudly said that he should shut up. They are barbarians too, right? What a nuisance. They are their property and they can treat them as they wish. He looked at him with a very angry expression and thought, maybe he should kill him? Athos put his hand in front of him to stop him and said that he didn't even have to think about it. The others helped him up and he went to the guard, apologized for his nephew, and said that he had simply never been to such places, so he lost his head a little. He handed him some coins, thanks to which the guard calmed down and asked why he was so rude. He apologized again and said that he would talk to him. He called this barbarian and said that his nephew really touched him to the quick. What will they do about it? He handed him some more coins. He laughed and said that anything can happen. Besides, they also belong to their ship. Besides, he wouldn't waste such a valuable resource. He grabbed MC by the hand, dragged him along with him, and he looked at the slave with a worried look and still agreed. They went up to the upper deck, and Rosso asked why he was so stupid. This is an imperial ship. If he killed him, they would have a lot of problems. Even he understands that. He apologized for this, and he said that although he himself would not mind beating him, because he really does not like such people. He thought about it, called his uncle, and asked if they could somehow help him. Athos turned to him and said that he did not even have to think about it. He said loudly that, however, he could not get him out of his head. He is not saying to help him escape. Since he belongs to the captain of this ship, they should at least try to negotiate with him. He called him by name and said that this man lost the battle with the Empire. The fate of the loser is entirely in the hands of the Empire. He is talking about more than just him. He may not have noticed, but there are many other slaves on board. He wants to ransom them all, and where will he get the money for this? Now they are just mercenaries hired by the Empire. He thinks they can afford it? Once you become a slave to the Empire, there's no turning back. He put his hand on his shoulder and said there was nothing they could do. He could just forget about it. Gaia, looking confused, asked how he could even do that. After some time, they finished sailing, and he thought of Galeria as the capital of the Empire, a huge, prosperous city where all roads converged. The city was under the personal rule of the Emperor. In the throne room, the general asked to be allowed to congratulate His Majesty. Having defeated the army of the Kingdom of Argias on the plains of Pyros, they were able to capture several key points, including the port of Pyros. Also, thanks to the help of the barbarian mercenaries, His Highness the Crown Prince was able to return safely to the capital. Glory to His Majesty the Emperor. Gordius, with a calm expression, said that they had done well. People in the crowd said that he never thought he would hear about them in the imperial capital. Anyway, these uncouth savages will soon leave here. Later in the office, the man called the head of the barbarian mercenaries, his deputy, and said that they had made an indescribable contribution to this battle. He will be responsible for distributing rewards for the mercenaries. His name is Herman Martaferto. It is a pleasure to meet him. The protagonist was a little confused, reciprocated, and thought that, surprisingly, he was very polite to them. He took the scroll and said that he could highlight two main achievements of their mercenary company. This was a significant contribution to the victory on the Pyros plains. They also went to the Coron fortress as reinforcements. They also helped the Crown Prince return to the capital during the retreat. He thought that Ponko was the Crown Prince's personal servant. To be honest, he didn't trust him at all. However, it seems he kept his promise, which is commendable. How glad he is that it's all over. He asked if they had any wishes. Athos, with a thoughtful look, said that, frankly, he couldn't even imagine what they could expect. He said that His Majesty highly appreciated their help with the Crown Prince's return to the capital, so they can offer anything if it is within their power. He thought about it and said that then he would like to ask for a permanent exemption of all barbarians from taxes. Is that possible? He thought about it, and MC thought that barbarians are a rather poor people. If Uncle had asked for a lot of money or other resources, it would have helped, but it was only a temporary measure. Through tax collection, the empire also gains information about the territories it controls. If the barbarians are exempt from taxes, then the empire's surveillance will be significantly weakened. This is much more important for his plans. He is only a little worried about his reaction. Herman considered this and said that he understood what they wanted. However, taxes are the foundation of the entire empire. He cannot simply exempt an entire people from taxes forever. However, he is willing to propose a different term. Judging by the current tax revenues from the barbarian territories, how about 5 years? Athos was surprised by this and said that he compared the life of the Crown Prince to only 5 years. That was too cheap. It must be at least 30 years. He considered this and said that they greatly underestimated the importance of their territories for them. Although they lack the ability to grow crops, they regularly supply hunting supplies as well as timber. All receipts are recorded in the proper documents, so he asks to reconsider the exemption period. He asked, however, that these documents probably don't mention the forced labor to which the barbarians were subjected. The tribe's population has declined significantly. They won't be able to pay taxes as before. Gaia, with a very surprised expression on his face, mentally wished his uncle luck and thought that he was very calm. He thought that negotiating with an imperial would be much more difficult. Perhaps he just kept running into people like that? As his uncle had said, it wouldn't be easy or quick to reach an agreement. However, he was clearly not that simple. He glanced at the system window nearby and thought that this was a mid-level civil servant. Judging by the information available, he was quite a capable man. Why is such a capable guy still an ordinary employee? Herman said that in that case, he proposed stopping at 15 years. During this period, all barbarian lands would be completely exempt from taxes. Later, he would draw up and hand them an official treaty. If any complications arise, they will need to meet again, and asks them not to leave the capital for now. The protagonist happily agreed, thanked him, and thought that his uncle had succeeded. 15 years is a long time. It should be enough to carry out his plan. During this time, he must restore the barbarian lands and gain strength to resist the empire. Athos said that he was grateful for such a generous offer. He said with a friendly smile that this was a fair reward that their group deserved. A worker came to them, called the master, and asked if he could speak with him. Herman turned to him and asked what was the matter. If it was not urgent, they could talk later. He said in a slightly worried tone that they had received a demand for payment of the bill for visiting the cat house where Crown Prince Muno had stayed. They demanded payment as soon as possible. Athos said that he could go. They did not dare detain him any longer. He apologized for that, and he asked how His Highness the Crown Prince was feeling. The employee, looking worried, said that they didn't need to know. His Highness the Crown Prince is consumed by alcohol and various entertainments. As a civil servant, he is terrified to look at the reports on his monthly expenses. The other day, they received a ransom demand for prisoners who participated in the Battle of Coron Fortress. The amount is very impressive. Do they think the last prince cares about this? He laughed and said that he was having a hard time. The employee said that His Majesty the Emperor also likes alcohol. They are quite similar in that way. In recent days, he has been especially heavy on drinking. Frankly, sometimes his complexion worries him. His Majesty has a hard time enough because of his body. Herman turned to him and said that he should watch his words. He turned to them, apologized, and said that he must have tired them with boring stories. Athos said it was nice talking to him. He thanked them for their kindness and said he would contact them later. Later, the two of them went outside and MC said it seemed like they had met a good man. He loudly agreed and said that he was also very strong in negotiations. 15 years, frankly, he was already ready to retreat for 10 years. Maybe he would have held out for another year or two, but everything turned out even better than he expected. He asked, "What's strange? Why such a gifted person occupies such a low position?" He agreed and said that he didn't know all the details, but he heard that high-ranking officials in the empire consisted only of famous aristocratic families. It seemed that more attention was paid to status than to a person's abilities. A clear example could be seen in the prince's entourage. Ability and talent alone are not enough to reach the top. Herman apparently understood this himself. Gaia asked in surprise, did he agree with this? He denied it and asked how it was possible to lose such a useful person. He thought, so nepotism prevails here? Even in this world, such problems exist. However, thanks to such talent, the empire was able to develop so much. The empire has many talented people and enormous wealth. It turns out that his opponent is incredibly strong. People on the street selling various items said that they should approach one by one. Today they have flatbreads and chicken soup on the menu. Hostess, 3 servings for them, please. Here too. He entered the establishment where Rosso was sitting, who asked for 2 more servings, noticed him and said that they were here. They should eat. They had already ordered a serving for him. They began to eat, and he said with a joyful look that it was very tasty. The food in the capital is simply amazing. Jessica also tried it and asked, "It's delicious, but isn't it just ordinary soup? What's so special about it?" The protagonist, with a calm expression on his face, thought that it was all about the spices. Salt and pepper are rare in their area, but in the Empire, almost everyone has them. Rosso called her and said that he was grateful that she prepared medicine for them. He looked at him and asked, "Are they running out of medicine?" It seems that his tribe suffered greatly. "How are they feeling?" He said that there is nothing to worry about. Their wounds heal quickly. Usually they just take the medicine and go to bed. However, because of this, they are used to taking great risks during battle. She said that the ingredients they had were very few left. They greatly depleted their supplies during the escape, so she went with her uncle to the market. Do they know what grows everywhere? It sells for a lot of money here. They did not spend so much. She saw these plants in the forest near the capital. Tomorrow she will go and collect them. He was surprised by this and said that then they should go with her and help. She was a little surprised by this and asked if the lizardmen are able to distinguish medicinal plants. He said with a smile that he was not sure. In the future, she should just lead them. She said that it is better not for beginners to do such things. There are many poisonous plants that are better not to touch. He understood her and said that then they would at least go hunting. He saw sheep on the plains. "I wonder if they are domestic." She looked to the side, called his name and asked why he was smiling. MC said that he was just glad to see that they were finally able to get along. They were surprised because of this, and Rosso asked what he did today. He saw how he and Athos were walking towards the castle. He took out a pouch and said that they visited the houses of aristocrats and got this. He poured money on the table, which surprised them very much, and he asked with a joyful look, "It's cool, isn't it?" They made a lucrative deal with the Empire as a reward for saving the prince. But for all the other aristocrats from his group, they never received rewards. So they walked around their houses. He smiled, but remembered how it happened, and thought that they were looking at them with clearly displeased eyes. They were barbarians, after all, and the people in the Empire despised them. When he thought about it, it infuriated him. They looked at it and said that the sum was considerable. It was hard to tolerate the crown prince, and this was quite worthy compensation. He asked, "Are they satisfied with this alone?" He wasn't going to stop. He hadn't even visited half the houses of the aristocrats he helped escape. They were surprised by this and asked loudly, "This isn't even half, so there will be even more?" With this money, they will be able to buy everything they need. They should think about how best to use it. He agreed with a tense look and said that it was a good idea. After some time, the squad members gathered, and Athos said that the Bruman tribe, Unguro, Bandar, the elves, and the lizardmen were all present. In that case, they would begin the meeting of the leaders. Today, he and Gaia went around the houses of the aristocrats and collected rewards from them. After deducting the costs of accommodation and supplies, a very impressive sum remained. They were all happy about this and said that it was really cool. Not for nothing, they worked so hard. He said that according to the rules, they should distribute all the gold equally among the tribes. However, he had an idea how to use this money. They were surprised by this and loudly asked, "What are they talking about? They don't want to take all the money for themselves, do they?" He will not give them his reward. They must stop talking nonsense. This gold belongs to them. Jessica asked them to calm down, and he thought that the leaders of all the barbarian tribes had gathered here. Each one strives for the good of his own tribe and pursues personal goals. For them to agree, he must convey to them that this money will go to the common good. He said with a serious expression that he would get to the point. This gold will go to ransom the barbarians who were enslaved. They were surprised and said that it was impossible to get rid of slavery. What did he even mean? Maybe if a slave is ransomed, he will become free. However, what if they are not sold? Elenif raised his hand and said that he had a question. First, is it really possible to ransom slaves? Second, will the ransomed slaves only belong to his tribe? The protagonist said that they should not worry. It is possible to ransom slaves. The main thing is to come to an agreement with the slave traders. The slaves he was talking about were also barbarians. It was not only about his tribe. They would ransom all slaves, regardless of their tribe. He would also take into account the opinion of each leader. They all thought silently, and he began to get nervous and wondered why they were all silent. Was there something they didn't like? If there was a chance to bring their fellow tribesmen back, then why? Suddenly, Athos turned to him and said that he was against it. He called him loudly and asked why he was saying that. He called him by name and said that he was his nephew, and he respected his opinion. With this gold, they could really save many from slavery. However, he thinks it would be better to use this money to rebuild the tribe. Buying back slaves could attract unnecessary attention from the Empire. He asked loudly, "Doesn't buying back barbarians from slavery contribute to the restoration of the tribe?" He also raised his voice and said that he should think again. What will they do if they return people to their tribes? MC said loudly that he doesn't see a problem with it. They are just buying slaves. It's a normal transaction. They will not break any imperial laws. He asked loudly, hasn't he still understood? It won't be limited to buying 1 or 2 slaves. The Empire's officials are not stupid. Of course, there will be no problems with the purchase itself. However, it will immediately arouse suspicion. They cannot take such a risk. The rest of the squad thought it over and said that they really better not expose themselves. If the Empire attacks again, they will definitely be destroyed. Now it would be better to spend this money on strengthening their tribes. Even after dividing the gold, it will be a huge amount of money. Their tribe will be able to live peacefully for a whole year. They are just unlucky. They will not be able to help. He still did not understand what was happening. Athos put his hand on his shoulder and said that they should spend this money on their own needs. Delicious food, expensive fabrics, everyone will surely be happy. It is more important to think about their families. There is no point in thinking about slaves now. Gaia pushed his hand away and said loudly that this was terrible. He himself had seen the torment the slaves went through. He cannot simply forget and abandon them. Are they ready to write off these people out of fear of the Empire? Chief Mabu called him and said that he should stop shouting already. He should give up their money already. Saving slaves was a hopeless undertaking. He could just consider them already dead. He was indignant about this and said that this was too much. Even having become slaves, they were still barbarians. He said loudly in a displeased tone that people only become slaves if they lose the war. He doesn't need helpless idiots. There are women among the slaves, so he tells him to give up this idea. It's better not to irritate the emperor unnecessarily. Does he understand that? He refused, and with a very serious expression, said that he will not listen to a cowardly dog who is ready to abandon his comrades. He got angry because of this, kicked him, and loudly said that since he is not thinking clearly, he will have to explain it to him differently. The protagonist stood up to this blow and loudly insulted him. Chief Mabu grabbed him by the throat, threw him to the ground, and the rest of the people began to watch this with joyful faces. He started punching him in the face and loudly asked who he called a cowardly dog. He is just a naive child. He should not think that because he was chosen as the head of the mercenaries, he can do whatever he wants. He must watch his words. He grabbed his arms, stood up abruptly, and hit his forehead in his nose. Immediately after, he stood up, threw him over his shoulder onto the ground, and loudly said that he was pathetic. He thinks they're just unlucky and can't do anything. They've all seen how they're being treated. They've been going through hell all this time. Do they really think they can't help them? Chief Mabu smirked at this and said that it was all useless. Just looking at the Empire, the difference in power is immediately clear. It's foolish to try to defeat an invincible enemy. Even now, they're mercenaries hired by the Empire. What's the use if he buys back the slaves? MC said in a displeased tone that his father, Chief Noel, rebelled against the Empire. Do they think he was just an idiot who didn't understand the difference in power? That's not true. Instead of living on his knees, he chose to fight for freedom. He lost, and many barbarians became slaves. Had fear really gripped their hearts so much that they had forgotten their barbarian pride? He would continue his father's work. He didn't care what the Empire thought. They were obliged to save their enslaved comrades. He was ready to go to the end, even if he had to sacrifice his own life. However, since they were all ready to live as loyal dogs of the Empire, it was better for them to go home. They were all indignant at this and asked, did he call them loyal dogs of the Empire? All these slaves were their friends too. They would definitely return them. He agreed and said loudly and decisively that their spirit could not be broken. They must cast aside fear and follow the dictates of their hearts. They would save their fellow tribesmen and return them home. Everyone supported his decision, which surprised some people. Later, Jessica wiped blood from his face and said that he was still bleeding. He should stop moving. His wounds needed to be treated. Gaia pulled away from her and said that he was fine. She shouldn't waste medicine on him. He thought that the wound had actually healed. She began to rub the handkerchief even harder with a displeased expression, and he asked her to stop, saying that it hurt. She said that she and his uncle had found a lot of medicinal herbs, so he didn't have to worry and could sit still. He agreed with a small smile and thanked her. She called him and asked since when he had been thinking about ransoming slaves. He said that he couldn't say for sure, but the idea had just occurred to him when they were in the camp. He thought that he simply grew up in a world where, in principle, there was no slavery. However, it is difficult to explain. He said that he simply did not like to see his comrades being treated so cruelly. She, with a confused look, said that he was very strange. At first glance, he seems very simple. She would even say very naive. He even got Chief Mabu angry to defend his idea. He turned away with a confused look and said that he simply angered him. Jessica said that, however, that requires a lot of courage. She, with a joyful smile, said that she thought he looked very cool. She and Rosso will help him, so they should try to do their best. These words pleased the protagonist, and he agreed with her with a smile. That evening, Chief Mabu was sitting in the same place and said loudly in a displeased tone that it was painful. This guy really infuriates him. Athos, smiling, said that this is just his nephew. Isn't he cute? He was indignant at this and asked loudly what he saw as cute in him. He acknowledged his abilities, but not this child. Hadn't he initially rejected his plan? Why did he suddenly change his mind? He laughed with a smile and said that he had tried to dissuade him. However, how could he go against the wishes of his dear nephew? He made a promise to his brother before his death. He was a brave warrior, a brave and responsible leader, who was ready to protect his comrades at any cost. He remembered how earlier he had called his brother and said that he needed to run because he was their leader. If he died, then who would take care of the tribe? Noel said with a smile that they had his son. He should just trust him. Chief Mabu, with a displeased expression, said that this was ridiculous. It didn't matter who it was, one couldn't get so attached to the words of a dead man. Athos said that he would not deny that he had thought so at first too. Only after his defeat in battle did he change, becoming more thoughtful and reasonable. He began to think more about the fate of the barbarians, looking for ways to improve life in the tribe. He saw a young man he could rely on. He had a feeling that he could achieve what he or his brother could not. He asked with a serious expression on his face, "Does he think he can defeat the Empire?" He agreed with a serious expression, and he slammed his mug on the table, loudly called him an idiot, and said that when the barbarians were in danger of annihilation, he should not regret his words. Also, he shouldn't drink so much. Who would have to clean up this guy's mess? He agreed with a calm expression and said that he would soon believe in him himself.